Knockback, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Knockback. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother, Dagan Matt Pinfield Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I have a little too much hair. Actually, did Pinfield have an era where he had hair?
I don't think so. I don't remember him ever having hair. No.
He'd always going for that Uncle Fester look.
Right. Well,
no offense.
Well, no. I mean, Ramon and I talk about it. He's still like bouncing around, but Ramon and I always talk about him that he's like a music encyclopedia of the exact shit we grew up with. So like you can ask him anything about Korn or some shit like that, and he'll, you know, or POD or some shit. He's just like totally encyclopedic apparently. And I've always wanted to meet him. I love that. Yeah.
That you got to have those guys in music. It's like the Martin Scorsese's or the Roger Eberts, but of music, not of film. You know what I mean?
Indeed.
You know what's funny? I was going to start with something else, but you reminded me of a time because I made a bald joke and I shouldn't do that. Right. Because one of the only things I have going for me is I'm not losing my hair.
Yeah. How is this possible? By the way, that neither of, well, I don't want to say me. I mean, I think I'm doing all right still. Like at 38, you're going to be 50 in December. Our dad looks like, I've said before, Benjamin Franklin. So with his hair. So it's
sorry, Dad.
No, I don't think he knows that. Like, you know, he's rocking it, but it's like, why didn't that happen to us? And then I've said before that they say, I guess it comes from your mom's dad, right?
Yes. And he had quite the head of lettuce.
He did. He really did. He really did.
Alessandro Ruggiero. Yeah, we have the Ruggiero hair gene. We don't have the Moriarty hair gene. So that, you know, that's good. But I remember I hadn't recalled this story in a long time. It's kind of scary and kind of weird. Did I ever tell you this? I'm sitting with John. We're in junior high school. Maybe we're in 7th grade.
John DePaula,
my best friend growing up.
Right.
Stayed after school. We went through this weird period. We didn't do this for long, but went through this like 1 or 2 month blip where we would stay after to watch the basketball games, junior high basketball games, Bellport Junior High School, Bellport Middle School, I should say. And this random adult bald man was sitting in front of us in the bleachers. And I don't know why, but I made some offhand Mr. Clean joke, half whispering to John, but the guy heard me, took a beat, turned around and grabbed me by the back of my neck. Now, this is a complete stranger. I'm a kid. I'm 12 years old at this point. Grabbed me by the back of the neck, turned around, grabbed me by the back of the neck and kind of pulled me in and said something to me, like pulled me close and said something to me, something threatening. I don't remember exactly what he said. And then let me go. And I was mortified. And I kind of, for the rest of the game, I was kind of stewing on it, but I was also afraid, you know? So I said I was going to go, I was saying to myself, I'm going to go home and tell Dad about this thing. And I have to ask Dad if I ever told him about it.
Yeah, I wonder
because
if he has a recollection.
I can't imagine, Graydon's at that age now. Graydon's a little older, right? He's around the same age. He's 13. That happened to him and he told me, I'd be fucking fuming.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not sure what I could do about it physically, but I would definitely be angry. But isn't that a weird thing? Like I was physically and verbally threatened by an adult as a 12-year-old. Now I said something stupid.
Yeah. I mean, he could have said something to you, but he obviously doesn't need to put hands on you. 1985 was a different time though, my friend. You know?
Really? Seriously, what are we thinking? We're thinking like that's 86. It kind of like in the wheelhouse where we're going to be today. Our conversation's going to hang out today. But isn't that crazy? I can't even imagine. Can you imagine that happening today? There would be such a like litigious fallout, right? That it would be insane.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah, go straight to jail.
Keep your hands to yourself. Is what I think.
Don't tell me no lies and keep your hands to yourself. What was that song?
I don't know. Hold on.
That could have made my list, actually.
Yeah,
that was 80s, I want to say.
Georgia Satellites.
Georgia Satellites. What? You're not going to get this on any other podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
Definitely not.
How are you doing, my friend?
I'm all right. I'm hanging in there. We're recording on a Saturday. I usually don't do any recording on Saturday, but I happen to be doing 2 shows today because I have to do this show and then we're doing something for, we're releasing Harbroxia Illymo on PC. and we redid parts of it. So we're going to do a little conversation about that.
You and Barry?
Yeah, me and Barry and some of the other guys too that worked on it.
Oh, that's awesome, dude. You're going to do a little roundup. Is it going to be a Sacred Symbols Plus?
No, I think we're going to put it on Lilimo's channel just to kind of try to promote
That's
the game
awesome.
or whatever, see what happens. But
Very
yeah, just
cool.
talk about some of the additions we made, because I wrote a whole intro and new ending to it. And like I said, I wasn't around when Hybraxia 1 came out, so I retconned it to fit with our new games. And I'm excited to see what people think about it or whatever. It's cool, man. I came up with this idea, actually, and we'll talk about it in the show. I think you'll appreciate it. Hybraxia is a very straightforward arcade shooter. So what we wanted to do was give it context.
Right.
And so I wrote all of these different, I might still have it around here somewhere, do I? I don't know. Instead of it's just like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, I put it in our solar system, and basically the aliens are invading the solar system, and you're working your way further and further out to all the places they attacked. So
that's
like
awesome.
the first fight is on Earth, the second fight's on the moon, the third fight's on Mars, the fourth fight is like in the asteroid belt and Jupiter and Saturn, and you get out and further out. And so I added all of these things about just intrigue about like where, so it's like, some helium-3 facility in Jupiter you're fighting, and there's just a little tag where it's like the aliens are drawn to your helium-3 facility to refill their ships or whatever, that kind of stuff. So we just wanted to give it some texture. But the cool thing I think I came up with, although I did draw it, but I don't know where it is, but they obviously did it again, was I was like, instead of having these screens where it's like stage 1, stage 2, and you just flip through, it's like, let's have a map of the solar system. And
love that.
Yeah. So we did that. And so like you choose each place as you go.
Okay.
And then this text and the name on the bottom and all of that is cool. And because we used a lot of asset flips in Hybraxia 2, and I gave a lot of these enemies and not monsters or machines backstories about what they were, I had to figure out why they were in Hybraxia 1, which was a challenge, but I did figure it out. So like, for instance, in Hybraxia 2, there's one of the places you go is a prison colony in there. So Hybraxia 2 takes place in their system. You're like attacking them. And they have a prison colony full of humans. So you attack there, and the enemy's name is whatever, and it's the warden, because he's like the overseer. So he's in the first game though, like as an asset flip. So I'm like, he's looking for slaves. Like that's why he's here. So like that I had to figure all that stuff out, but
Dude,
it was cool.
I love that. I love the thoughtfulness of that. And now you're this is going to Steam.
So we're going to put it on PS5 imminently as well, because it's not there. And then I think we're going to do, I'll just say it here, is I'm probably going to do a physical run of them. Our first PS5 game will be our first physical PS5 game, and then we'll release the patch for. So Hybraxia already exists. By the way, if you own it on PS4 or Vita, you'll get it for free on PS5.
Oh, that's cool too. Yeah, that's a nice little perk.
Yeah. So
and you got the extra content in there now.
Yeah, because Hybraxia 1 sold like 30,000 copies, something like that.
That's huge.
It is, but it's at all different price points, right? So we sold it for $8, which is its max, and we've sold it for like 99 cents and $2 and $4. So who the hell knows? So we just want to leave the games in good places. When we're a little frustrated, I am definitely frustrated with the way Super Perils of Baking did, which is not good. Just because it's so much better than the original Perils of Baking, and Perils of Baking sold more. It's like, that's outrageous.
Like, does that suck?
No offense to Barry, because he knows better than anyone. The original Perils of Baking is very crude, like borderline console worthy game, and we made it into something so heavily inspired by Super Mario World with I wrote a fucking whole epic poem, for that, like ties through the entire game and all this stuff. And the secret ending of the game ties into Hybraxia and all that. And I'm like, oh, you motherfuckers.
Doesn't it suck? There's no way to capture the zeitgeist, right? And just kind of, how do you harness that lightning in a bottle? It's like so elusive with anything. I feel like that's with anything though, right? A post, a Twitter or Instagram post, like, why did this one do so well and this one do so poorly? It's just the essence of hitting things at the right time. Who knows? Yeah,
it's frustrating, but someone did check me, because I kept saying, I think that, and I do think that this had something to do with it, that the game didn't do well in part because we released it into the PSN at the time when the PSN was totally fucked with shovelware. There was like a year or two where shovelware was absolutely murdering PSN, and people were really upset about it, and they fixed it right after. I did a huge show on it, actually. I think I might have had something to do with them fixing it, actually, but Super Perils of Baking was just launched into this thing where it's like, oh, here's Super Perils of Baking and a couple other real games and 7,000 fake games, and they're all just there equal.
That sucks.
And so I think that had something to do with it, but someone was like, maybe your game just sucks. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so.
No, it's definitely... No, it's that needle in the haystack thing. You know what I mean? It's like, how do you find it? If you don't know, you got to be tuned into, that's the thing. That's the nice thing about Sacred Symbols, though. You have a built-in audience there.
Yeah, truly. So yeah, that's so Hebroxia 2 killed 2. We're going to do another Hebroxia game, Hebroxia 0, which is a prequel. And that will be cool.
Awesome.
And I've designed it. I'm saying so much here. I don't think Barry really cares though. Is that Hebroxia 0 I've designed as the story will be a training module. So it's going to be like a much more arcadey, like very arcadey, like that's what they're training to fight the aliens in kind of thing.
That's a great idea.
And then Hebroxia 3 will be the last one. And that will be like the culmination of like the humans and the aliens fighting each other once and for all.
Super sick.
Yeah. So,
but you definitely want to finish it with 3.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I want to move on. It's like,
yeah, I think
it's so funny. We're in the same trap that a lot of developers, big developers, real developers find themselves in, which is we already invested so much into this thing. Like we got to extract as much out of it. But at some point, I want to move on, and I want our role playing game especially to shine. I am very curious to see what people think of it because I've been saying this. It's very true to the 16-bit era. And I think some people are going to think like, well, this doesn't really pass muster as a modern game. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of the idea. So I hope that people, get that spirit of it.
I love that.
And the story is certainly awesome. Like if I do say so myself. So
the story is, I know first and foremost, the story is awesome. And I love the fact it's not, a quote unquote pixel remaster. It's something like the essence of like a true early 90s 16-bit JRPG, early to mid 90s.
Yeah, definitely. Because I'm playing Sea of Stars and I'm almost done with it. And it's so beautiful and it's really great. Really, really great. Doing something very different than us. It's much more, it's much more linear than ours. I think will be in some sense.
It is linear.
Yeah, are you playing it?
I played the demo and I'm like 2 or 3 hours into.
Oh, great! Maybe we'll have you on the spoiler cast if you're done in time. Yeah, I'm playing that and I'm like, oh man, like this game is beautiful, and really our game is beautiful too. But we want to make 2D retro games. It's like unapologetic. That's what we want to do.
I love that.
And so I just hope people continue to dig the spirit of it. I thought Super Perils of Baking was a very, very good game, and I was annoyed by its not so much its critical reception. It did pretty well actually, but its commercial reception. And Hebroxia 2 frustrated the shit out of me because it did really well commercially and critically, but I put all this story into Twin Breaker as a joke. And then people took it seriously, not understanding the meta of the game. And then I took that, I was sensitive about it. So I'm like, I'm not going to put that much story in Hebroxia 2. Then people play Hebroxia 2 and they're like, where the fuck's the story?
I can't win.
And then so I did this whole, we did this emergency patch where I'm like, all right, I'm going to write a whole thing for it. And now that's like the version of Hebroxia 2 that exists. But I don't know, man. So then I'm like, I'm going to sit down and write this fucking poem. I'm not a poet. I'm not Alexander Pope.
No, but you can write.
I can, but it was not natural for me at all. And I wrote this, and I wrote for children, Yeah. I don't know. I thought it would be cuter than people that thought it was, I guess.
You got to honor what you want to do with each project. That's the lesson there. You can't please everybody. You got to just kind of go in for it with conviction for yourself. And then people will come to it from that genuine vision, I think. That's easier said than done though, because you want your product to do well, right? You want people to enjoy it. But that's the hard part of creating, I think. It's just kind of being true to your own vision. Just, the rest comes as it comes. That's anything. I think making anything. And that's, again, it's hard to walk the walk, but you got it.
Indeed. All right. On that high note.
Let's do it.
Let's get into it. Today's topic is MTV. And I wanted to throw it over to you because you had this idea for this topic, which I think is really great. And it's funny because I don't think MTV has virtually any relevance anymore, or at least not much relevance. And I think its era of true relevance is probably 20 years behind us, at least, I would say.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
This, and actually a lot of that irrelevant time, or some of that irrelevant time, is when I was even watching it. But I'm curious what you wanted to talk about with this and where your mind went with MTV, which is a really broad topic, but also a very specific topic about music videos and the proliferation of music and the zeitgeist of the culture, and how I would say from probably the early 80s to the late 90s, MTV kind of drove American culture.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. That was the era, man. And of course, like always, nostalgia, right? It's Knockback, so a little bit of remember when. In this case, remember growing up when MTV played actual music videos.
Indeed, I know. That was like such a thing, and now it's people used to say that almost as a lark, and now it's true. It's
so true.
Yeah.
Right. It became kind of spun off with Viacom or Paramount, whatever you're supposed to call them now, and being under that umbrella and spinning off into this reality TV entity, right? Abandoning their roots. I guess first they kind of shuffled that off to VH1, another Paramount entity, and then just kind of music videos kind of went away altogether. So they are extra nostalgic now. But you know what, Kyle? I always loved the music video format. You know, as a movie guy, it's a short film.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's all it is. It's a format with almost infinite possibility. The only real rule is you got to have the music, right? Otherwise, it's a medium with really kind of few limitations. If you think about it, you could do almost anything. You're really bound only by your imagination. And I was always drawn to it as a kid. Plus, it's short, right? It's a short format. So you're in and out, even if it's an expensive venture. It's 4 minutes, not a feature film. I always found the format of watching music videos very exciting. You know, they could be narrative. They could tell a complete story. They could be stylized. They could just be a vehicle, a very straightforward, edited collage of the band for promotion purposes. We've seen plenty of those. You know, they may come up in our conversation. They could be live action. They could be animated. They can be a send up of television or movies. They're as an art form, their potential is literally boundless. You know, I would be content today to just work on commercials and music videos. I find them really, really kind of a great creative outlet, unlike film or TV series or an animated series or whatever kind of art you could get into. They were really special. I'm kind of sad that they've fallen by the wayside in many ways, maybe with the YouTube and sort of an ushering of the short format, which I would argue YouTube has gone largely long form, but maybe it's been a kind of return to it. But there was just something very special about the era of watching music videos on cable television, not on demand, just came on and you got what you got. And you could sit down and you could watch 6 or 10 music videos at a time and just be entertained and enjoy the music and enjoy the visuals. It was really just kind of a fun era. And I thought we would just go in and just kind of, I guess, for me, I want to know how you broke it down. And there's really no rules, but I tried not to go by like a beloved musical genre. Mm-hmm. Like for me, that would be something like hip hop. And then try to artificially squeeze at least one rap video in there. What I did, and I tried not to go off the merits of the music too much, though a few of the things I picked, obviously the song is good. I tried to go off the video itself, you know, just hold up the video itself and not even really a best of, but just music videos that I remember impacting me in some way. And I think my selections some of them may be a little offbeat. But again, they're personal, right? And they span probably 2 decades worth, you know, just in choosing 5, let's say. I have a bunch of honorable mentions, but if we're just going to go 5 a piece or something like that or so, I think that could be fun. And, you know, I just got done working on a video for a mutual friend of ours, animating a music video for her. So they were on my mind. You know, they were just kind of on my mind of like, wow, I really enjoy this being in and out, you know, something short form. Maybe that they always say like MTV style editing, right? Gen X, your generation. We grew up with that sort of short form taste of things. And I think there's something too for the older generations, the boomers on back, that they didn't really get this. You know, this was really very much our thing from Gen X on forward.
Yeah,
so I feel like I feel ownership over it.
That's what I was going to say to you. Was there's something interesting about the provenance of music videos, because really they come from deep into the pre-MTV era and really from the 50s. But a lot of it was live action with dubs, and we see that on all of the earliest variety shows and the late night shows, on and on and on. And then that doesn't happen nowadays. People really play on those shows now. But a lot of that was dubbed into the studio, kind of mimicking, and that was fun. And that is a piece of what I love about music videos, actually. And I think I've said this to you and articulated this to you before, is that I don't like music videos, generally speaking, if the band's not in it playing. That to me is an essential part of it. It doesn't have to be them playing the entire time, but if you know if there's like probably they're editing between a half dozen shots or things, one of those has to be the band playing, right? Because I think that's really important. I hate when, actually I'm wearing a Dread shirt, and their video for Same Old Road is shitty in my opinion, because it's cool because it's claymation and all this interesting, but they're not in it. Yeah. It's like, I don't know, man. Part of the fun of music and live music is thinking of the guys playing it and them playing it live. And I love that kind of thing. So when I think about the Beatles did music videos, and they did MTV style music videos. But the reality is that they were so far decades ahead of their time in every way, that even their contemporaries weren't really able to do the same. You know, when you think about the Beach Boys and others, like they weren't doing similar things. A lot of it, again, was live action or live dub. And you think about some of the variety shows in the 70s, like the music shows that go into the 80s. And those are almost, it's so funny. I go look for, I don't know, something live from the 70s, like the Bee Gees live or whatever. And then it will come up with something from, what was that show? That 70s variety music show.
Soul Train
or something like that, but it's like, oh, Bee Gees live or someone live. And it's like, it's not live. It's just it's literally it's the stereo version of it and them playing it. Right. And there's famous shows in Britain that did that for a long time too. But
Top of the Pops and all
right.
that.
Right. Like they don't, in fact, Nirvana lampooned Top of the Pops when they were on it. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where they just don't play and do not sing anything right. So like
I never saw that.
I think like one of them, like Dave Grohl's just hitting a cymbal and they're like not even singing, and he's just playing it like this or whatever, because they wanted to play and they weren't allowed, I guess. So I think of that, but then I think come the 80s, obviously it really all begins on MTV, I guess, with Video Killed the Radio Star.
Yeah.
But I think of my own era with MTV as a little bit later than yours, in that my earliest nascent memories of MTV are the late 80s and into the early 90s. And I used to watch it a lot with our sister Dana, who was very, very attached to MTV at that time. And I have very specific memories of music videos from that era. Basically, 1990, like Faith No More, Smashing Pumpkins, Stone Temple Pilots, and the Chili Peppers. The Chili Pepper, Give It Away, that video is like iconic. Yeah, and I think about that video. I also think about different characters that were around at this time. Kennedy and Loader, and we later get to someone like Pinfield, but even people like RuPaul come from this era on MTV and VH1. And I like, because people look at RuPaul's like, oh, RuPaul's drag show. I'm like, dude, you are 30 years late to like who RuPaul really is and like where he comes from. And I always loved that, because no one really, I mean, I'm sure there were people making fun of RuPaul and calling him gay and shit, but he was kind of just like a figure in culture. And everyone's like, oh yeah, that's the gay guy that dresses like a woman that's on MTV or VH1 and does, you better were. So the other thing
there was a whole period, and Martha Quinn, right?
And Martha
MTV
Quinn,
Raps.
of course. And MTV News. And that's the other thing I was going to say too, was there are 3 shows specifically, and then a spinoff that I wanted to bring up, but we can get into all of this, is that I was a big mark for Total Request Live, which is after your time, but that came out when I was in 9th grade. And that was a tradition after school for several years. 120 Minutes was a major, major, major show to me when I discovered 120 Minutes through the 311 forums when I was in middle school. I was like, wait, what? And you'd stay up until 1 a.m. or whatever it was, and it would just be all the shit you want to listen to finally. K-Rock and everything, just one after the other. And I used to record it on VHS. And then Headbangers Ball was something I was introduced to primarily. That started in the late 80s. I was introduced to it primarily when it moved to MTV2. And that was the other thing I wanted to say, was MTV2, what used to be called M2. And then MTV2 in the late 90s and into the early 2000s was fucking awesome. That was peak MTV, because they finally said, like, fine, fuck it. We're not doing any music videos anymore, with the exception of like TRL and all of our little shows. It's going to be a lot of different things, The Real World and Road Rules and all this stuff. And on the other side, we're going to put all the music videos. And they really, for 10 years, really did that. And it was awesome. So that I wrote down in my notes, the last time I remember MTV being culturally relevant in my life was the summer of 2005, because that was the last time I lived home at Dad's, and I would have it on in the background constantly, to the point where it would really be the same 50 videos. And you would be like, oh, now here. And the music I think of that time, like Weezer's Beverly Hills comes to mind and stuff like that.
That's a big one.
and like that specific era. So yeah, it's a really great. And then of course, like you said, VH1 and the spinoff to VH1 and kind of the more the live music and kind of the more indie folk, Lollapalooza. What was that? Lilith Fair. And that kind of stuff,
God.
that was kind of more like VH1's situation.
Did they do all the unplugged as well?
Right, the unplugged stuff, and then they did like pop-up video, and
yes,
which was awesome. I have there's some ideas that were so good where I'm like, why did you stop doing this? And then suddenly like this, I feel like MTV just stopped being really truly relevant in music. It became relevant for probably 10 or 15 years solely for, and VH1 especially, because I used to review those shows at IGN solely for the reality television, and now I don't hear anyone give a flying fuck about it. And music videos are still very much in existence. They're just on YouTube, and people still make music videos, and some of them are really good. Some of them suck, but that's not any different than back in the day. Remember when you had like a big record, let's say like Stone Temple Pilots Core or something, and it was like or No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom, and it would be like the fourth or fifth video that would come from it would always be like the live footage video. Like they're like, we're not even, it's literally, we have no money or time. They're on tour.
Right, we spent enough.
Right. Like, so we're just going to do like live footage of them fucking around and having fun. And that's going to be the video.
That's a great point. That was always the rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You get like the really good video.
Yeah.
The second video, the third video, sometimes they would go back and do another video for the first one. So like Tears for Fears did that, and Alien Ant Farm did that, and a bunch of others. And then they would finally get to like the kicking the album out the door, when they're on tour kind of video.
It's so true. I forgot about MTV too. And then, it kind of got, really the reality TV show starting with The Real World, and then like a slow trickle into the Jackass age. And then, of course, Rob Dyrdek with Ridiculousness and all that kind of stuff. And then that just kind of became the dating shows, Flava Flav. I don't know if that was VH1 or MTV.
Yeah, they become one and the same at some point. A lot of that stuff goes to VH1, I think, except
Bret Michaels. Remember, he had his whole vehicle on there, right? So it was, it was an interesting era, but it did. I love your point about music videos always existing as sort of this promotional thing for bands and just really getting them in front of people on the TV. But MTV was that one-stop shop. Now there was a place to just show them, right? Now it's landed back on YouTube, and I guess that's sort of a one-stop shop too. Or the band could just have their videos on their websites or stuff like that. But yeah, that was just the one place. It is interesting how they got out and how then Viacom sort of dissolved the MTV VH1 thing, at least to the traditional, form of that, way before cable sort of evaporated. It almost is like the prescient, like they saw the writing on the wall, but I don't really think that's what it is. But it is kind of lucky for them that they kind of folded that up ahead of how the format would go, where now cable is all but irrelevant 2023.
Right, totally.
That's what's so fun about looking back. And again, just like tuning in, and like the radio still is now, just kind of getting what you get, which is kind of in this sort of on demand, I could watch anything or listen to anything anytime. There's just something charming about remembering when it wasn't like that. Tuning into the top 40 on the radio, or tuning into MTV and just seeing something new, or seeing something you saw 30 times, or seeing something you like or something you didn't like, and just being beholden to what was airing. That's just I'm sure there's people listening to us right now, not many, because we have basically older people listening to the show, but where they don't even remember that, where it was like, you watch what you're given. It's like so crazy to think.
Yeah, it is.
We live through all that.
Yeah, it is. It is very, very strange and very interesting in the sense that that feeling of, especially on the radio, but also on MTV, of just turning it on too quickly or too late, rather. So you get the tail end of the song, or you're hoping it's only they're in the chorus, and you're hoping it's before the second verse, but it's the end of the song, and you get so frustrated. You're like, God damn it! It does seem very quaint. Like I said, with Total Request Live, especially when that launched in 98, when I was in 9th grade, Carson Daly hosting it or whatever, I'd come home and watch that every day, every single day. And eventually became canny enough to start recording the videos I wanted. I remember recording like Offspring's Pretty Fly for a White Guy off of it. And obviously 311's Come Original. And I remember people were playing pranks because you would vote online, I think. And then people would play pranks where I think New Kids on the Block won TRL once, and all these organized. And then, and it would be
TRL.
like an hour or 90 minutes. So they wouldn't be able to get everything in. So they would be like, number 6 today is whatever. And then it would just be a truncated version of the video. And you get really mad because that was the video you wanted to see. I thought that was really fun. Like it was perfect for people my age that had an eclectic taste in music. Cause I wasn't really into pop music at that time. That was a lot of Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys and stuff like that. But it was a cool way. That was kind of the last burning embers of MTV being relevant in my life. After that, it was like Jackass and all of that kind of kept it relevant, but it certainly wasn't music anymore.
No, it changed. And you know what, Kyle? I mean, it always was, but even dating back to the early 80s. But what's so important to say about this, I think, for us, both of us, is that it was so New York, especially that TRL era. People flocking to Times Square to be in the show, to be shot outside the windows.
Yeah, did you ever see that when you were down there? Did you ever see people down there?
Oh my God. We would try to avoid Times Square, but I often worked in that vicinity, whether it was a little bit further uptown or a little further downtown, but I often worked in Midtown. So by some extent, it was unavoidable. I mean, Nickelodeon and the Paramount building were at 50th and Broadway. So that's right in the heart of it. You know, it was just TRL was just a few blocks downtown. So, but, you know, just the fact that was such a New York institution and people would come from out of town just to get a little screen time outside the window when they shot, go into a commercial or something. So New York and such an East Coast entity when really almost everything else for film and television was Hollywood. You know, it felt so intrinsically part of like an East Coast vibe. And they held on to that. You know, it was all done. The art direction, the people that started the whole thing, the people that designed the MTV logo and did the animated interstitials and brand, the logos and the flying logos and the brand IDs and the bumpers. It was just through and through. It was just like a taste of New York, which I always thought was so cool. And as I got older and I understood that more, it was like a source of pride.
So talk to me about some of the stuff you remember from the 80s. I mean, what comes to mind for you? You were talking about some of the acts and so I wonder where your mind goes.
Yeah. When it comes to the 80s, I mean, it's just a collective image of just tuning in to music videos. I love what you said too about back then it was all radio, or maybe we had cassette tapes. This was pre-CD. So it was all oral, you know, it was all listening to the music. So I love what you said about the bands being in the video and having a chance to actually see them as well as hear them. Because prior to that, aside from appearing on television on a late night show or a show like Soul Train or something like that, where they would make an appearance, unless you went to a live show, you didn't get to see the band. It wasn't a thing yet. You know, TV was still, think about it, was only like 30 years old at that point. It was in its infancy. You know, it was still the Wild West. So MTV and seeing the music videos was a chance to see your favorite artists, your favorite groups, your favorite bands. And I love thinking about it that way. It was kind of a miss if you couldn't catch a glimpse of them in the video, whether starring as a part in something narrative or just playing on stage and, you know, hyping that aspect of it up. I think I thought of it when I was a little younger as well. That's kind of cool that they have the restraint not to have their face plastered all over it. They would rather tell a story or do something artsy or something. But I think for fans, that was a point of consternation. It was like, but where's the band? You know, where's John and Richie Sambora? I want to see them. Yeah. I don't want to see this, you know, stage play acted out with these randos. I want to see the band, you know? So, you know, what's funny though? I think of rock music, especially acts that were successful, that had a lot of money. They were able to take liberties and do that because it wasn't at a certain point. Think of Taylor Swift today, right? Like Taylor Swift is so big. She doesn't need to have her face on anything anymore. It's done. It's over, right? And when those acts get to that level, you don't think of the Genesises and the Tom Petty and the Heartbreaker, you know, whatever, big bands. They didn't need to do that. So I always thought it was cool when they had the money and they could just say, we're not even going to be in this one. Give it to a big name director. We have this, you know, highfalutin concept and we'll just go with it. But, you know, then it was to the era of, you know, we could do something animated. We could do something a little more stylish. We could put out the money to do this. We don't have to have our face play. They already know who we are. You know what I mean? I think at the height of MTV, probably you talk about the early 90s. By the time it reached the late 80s, early 90s, and I think it was reaching its zenith at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was reaching the summit of how big it was and how successful it was and how popular it was. That there was a lot of that, but rap music never did that. Rap music, I can't even think of a case where the rappers were not front and center. You know, it was all about that huge ego. Like they had to be in it, you know, the cars and the women and everything like that. But the rappers, I can't even think of a single instance. And I'm talking about from Beastie Boys on through like Public Enemy, the West Coast stuff, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, they were always in their videos. You know what I mean? There was never an instance where they had this kind, you know, this kind of this concept, this artsy concept where they were just taking a back seat. They always had to be in there. And you kind of love rap music for that. It kind of introduced a whole style. You knew what you were getting. You know, it was really kind of, God, I mean, I don't think rap music would have reached the suburbs like it did at the rate it did without music videos. That's another thing I think of, right? It would have in the inner cities and b-boying and breakdancing and graffiti, it was like part of the culture. But I think the rate of how fast it seeped outside of the cities to the suburbs and to a larger fan base was largely a result of music videos and just bringing it to the masses, bringing that whole musical form to the masses, that genre.
I also think it was interesting to allow a literal fusion of the style of the music and the genre of the music with the style that would come out of that. So you think about new wave and Flock of Seagulls or something, right? Like the Flock of Seagulls haircut is famous really from a single video, although they did multiple videos. But I Ran is the video that people always think of, which is an iconic MTV music video. But then you also think about things like hair metal. And I think about new metal from the sense of Slipknot and Mudvayne and Mushroomhead and the guys that wore costumes or masks and stuff. I think that the music's good, I think, of all the bands I just mentioned. But I think that the aesthetic was so heightened by the ability to see it and digest it potentially for the first time, probably for the first time by seeing it all together at once. So that when you saw Mudvayne's video for Dig or something and they're dressed like devils, basically, which I thought was super cool. I had a poster of them on my wall in high school. I loved them. And which is so strange. It was very scary and weird to look. They don't wear masks anymore or anything like that, but Slipknot still does. But I think that it's cool that MTV kind of gave rise not only to a bunch of different genres, from the most poppy stuff to, you know, like we were saying, Headbangers Ball and some pretty hard stuff, never black metal or anything like that, but pretty hard stuff. But then things like you were brought up Richie Sambora and just think about Poison and a little bit later and Rat and whatever. And I just think a lot of that benefited from the aesthetic, the visual aesthetic that was seen.
That's a great point. Yeah, glam rock and hair metal. That was the imagery and the look was such a huge part of that. You couldn't have it with any other way.
Right. Like Kiss was almost a little early, you know, like Kiss took advantage of it a little bit, but it's kind of cool that they were able to do it before it, you know, and that must have been same thing with like a David Bowie style, you know, Ziggy Stardust type character that you're playing. Like they were able to do it a little bit before, but it wasn't common. That's
true.
Yeah.
Can you imagine like those personas? I love bringing up David Bowie, but Kiss especially, like reaching the pinnacle of popularity without even really, with just TV appearances and like album covers and stuff like that, or a magazine article or two, like doing it and sort of flying high and already being very successful, like globally recognizable before MTV, before the advent of MTV. That's pretty special. You got to have something, you know, and I can't really weigh Kiss musically with any kind of expertise because I'm not a musician. That's more your thing. But they did something very powerful in just knowing that maybe they weren't the best act musically, but their visual presentation was so strong and so appealing somehow. We talked about this on the show before, to kids especially, or, you know, all young boys, probably ranging from the age of 6 through 18, right? They just had something, you know, talk about capturing the zeitgeist. And David Bowie before that, you know, it's really interesting. I love the point about glam rock and hair metal, Poison, Rat. I remember Cinderella, Striper, that whole genre.
Yeah, LA Guns,
LA
like
Guns.
all of those guys, like it's interesting. The like I said, I think the other 80s era genre that really benefited from it, I think, was new wave. You think about Devo, for instance.
Sure.
Like a completely iconic look from their music videos,
God.
right? And I say that with all due respect. I fucking love Devo. I don't think that's a lot of people know about. That's Good is one of my favorite 80s songs ever. I love that song. That song rules. Then got songs from
Shout out Mark Mothersbaugh.
Oh, hell yeah, dude. And Josh,
still very relevant.
Yeah, they are. Josh
active.
Freese plays drums with them now, who is the drummer of the Vandals and all these different like
I didn't know that.
Dude, I want to see them so bad because their live acts are supposed to be dope. They still wear all the same outfits and they play that very straight up like mechanical, like they're like looking straight ahead and like all like marching as they're playing and stuff like that. I'm like, this is dope, dude. Stagecraft is so important.
So influential.
Yeah, I love them.
Right?
So
took that whole German thing and made it accessible for Western audiences to the fact. I remember our Aunt Joni, who was very mainstream disco, had very mainstream tastes as a person born in the early 60s, loved Devo. Like somehow Devo was strange, but somehow accessible.
Yeah, it was like our Kraftwerk, or like one of those bands, like exactly. It's a version of Kraftwerk or one of these very weird European bands that were even early that we could understand. That was like translated for our minds. And then I think about, it's funny. Another thing I loved, and this is just neither here nor there, but I loved when bands didn't look the way you thought they would look. For some reason, I always think of the band Helmet, which is a very random rock band from the early 90s.
Yeah.
And they still exist today. But what I love about them is they were playing like, if you listen to the song Unsung or something, it was like, just like real thrashy, early rock. They're all in like button downs and like all like dressed really nice and stuff. And I'm like, that's dope too. And that's like a meme today about like when you see a guy dressed in like a suit and tie at a hardcore show, or like when the guitarist at a hardcore show is in a suit, you're about to die in the pit or something like that.
Yeah, dude, that irony of like the juxtaposition, like, with the visual presentation versus the music and the expectation of like, oh, these guys sound like this, so they must look like this. And then being able to either go along with that image, you think of somebody like Gwar, right? It's like, okay, yeah, I get it. But then you could do the opposite thing, and yeah, like the advent. I love you talking about the 90s too, because it was, you think about the 80s with MTV and sort of the flashpoint or the genesis of it. But I think in many ways, the early to mid 90s was the strongest. And maybe that's a specific age perspective for me, because I was in my late teens and early 20s at that point, and you were just old enough to start getting into that stuff. So maybe that's just kind of our wheelhouse. But I do remember that being very powerful, and sort of the advent of nerd rock with Weezer and stuff like that. Very super important. In fact, ironically, for all the nostalgia, especially of the 80s and how much I love that whole decade, I only had one video in the 80s of like my top 5 or 6 picks, and that was Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer.
Oh yeah,
and
I love that video.
Oh, dude, it was so impactful to me. It was just eye candy. It was mesmerizing. I guess 86, I'm like 12 years old. 86 is a very special year, I think, for just our nostalgia. But if you're thinking about MTV, it's kind of a special time because they had a head of steam. It wasn't early 80s where it was still kind of figuring itself out. Maybe there wasn't enough. So they had maybe 10 videos in rotation at first. Now every band, it was essential to have a couple of music videos to promote every album, and maybe more than that. And there was hundreds and hundreds of music videos, and the budgets were getting bigger, and they were getting bigger name directors, and they were getting, they were willing to put more money into it for promotional purposes, or maybe just for bragging rights. It was like, you have to have this MTV Music Awards, all that kind of stuff. So 86, we were rolling now. The formative years were over. It was a known thing. It was a known commodity. And Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer, man, Peter Gabriel's fascinating to me just as being a part of Genesis, one of the biggest rock bands ever. A lot of people credit Genesis with ushering in progressive rock.
Hell yeah, I love prog rock.
Or at least one of the players in that, right? And you got Phil Collins and Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks and Steve Hackett, and yeah, everybody in the band. It was like almost Zeppelin-esque, and like everybody in the band is a player. You know what I mean? Like there's no like weak link in that chain. So Peter Gabriel being initially and then being part of that and then leaving was always fascinating to me. But then, Sledgehammer just as one of the early animated videos, not hand drawn, stop motion, but in researching it, it does make sense. Nick Park of Aardman Animation, think Wallace and Gromit. This was early Aardman before their huge success. Now they have Nathan Love, one of the biggest production houses, one of the highest quality animation studios in our country. Sort of the United States extension or the United States entity of England's Aardman. So Nick Park, and then I think the brothers Quay, another claymation stop motion team that's our maestros of the craft, animating this thing. And just how also like just a great song, just a great rock song and a great expensive visual presentation to go along with that song. An epic album, the So album, an epic album, and as a promotional vehicle. That, I think everything about that video, it's kind of a weird pick for me because it's not exactly my style of music now or then, but it was just special in that one video, I think, captures just a time and what it felt like. And I think when it was at sort of the height of its power, the music video was at the height of its power, or at least coming into that, reaching that zenith.
It's so funny you should bring up So, because I was just apropos of nothing, I was just watching something. I watched this guy, I can't remember his name on YouTube. I just found him recently, where he goes into like the top 10 songs of a random year, this date that he publishes it. So it was 1986 of this date, 1986, the top 10 songs. And Sledgehammer was, I think, number 1 that week. And he was saying that, and you must know this, or maybe you do know this, I didn't know this, is that song was written like very, like, basically they were done with the record and they had like one last idea. And so they like basically unpacked all their stuff and did Sledgehammer.
No, I didn't even know
and that they named it, I guess, after this idea that they were like construction workers on the record. That's like, they were using a lot of analogies while they were making the record, like, all the little sayings that they would say during it that called to like construction or carpentry or whatever. So they called it Sledgehammer. And I thought that was so interesting because that is a really, really iconic, visually aesthetically pleasing video, very similar to Dire Straits in some sense, Money for Nothing, which is one of the iconic kind of animated or manipulated videos of that era too. I love that video too.
Early CG.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the first
Yeah,
CG
isn't it the first or
like,
something, or one of the first 3D?
It was definitely the first, as far as I know, it was definitely the first computer, 3D animated music video. There were other things up to that point that had been done in commercials and some, sequences in film, but that was definitely, I think, as far as I know, the first music video that used it, which is, I mean, think about, this is the mid 80s, those two videos, interestingly enough, both animated, ironically, but they just feel still like the mid 80s. I think I read a thing of Peter Gabriel talking about making that video with Nick Park and the other animation geniuses behind it. And the fact, that sequence where it's stop motion and pixelation and that thing where the fruit's circling his face. Peter Gabriel said he was under that glass plate for like 16 hours at a time. And he remembered it was so labor intensive and so expensive, but he was comforted by the fact that no one's going to be stupid enough to replicate this. No one's going to do this. I almost said the retarded word. It's so stupid.
But then you just said it.
Stupid
You're like, I almost just said the retarded word.
No one's going to copy this, And I love the fact that, Peter Gabriel just went on to only get bigger, and Nick Park and Aardman and the brothers Quay. These are all household names now. But this was when they were kids. I mean, they were young. They were really young. Peter Gabriel wasn't exactly a kid anymore. But the animators were young, and just starting out. And God, I still think Sledgehammer is one of the coolest videos because we hadn't really seen any outside of Terry Gilliam and the stuff he did for Monty Python. We hadn't seen a lot of stuff like that. It was very avant-garde still.
Sure. Yeah. And shout out to Peter Gabriel. He really reinvented himself several times. It's obviously one of his most famous songs, but Salisbury Hill has always been a really fascinating song for me because it is so blatantly about his leaving Genesis. I think that it's really interesting to just hear it, and listen to it through that lens and how sad it is in some sense. What else do I have here? Yeah, so I wrote a few bands down that I thought really represented music videos for me. I want to give 2 shout outs to bands that were very, very much in my wheelhouse in the mid 90s through MTV that I came to love still to this day, which is Green Day and then later No Doubt. And I actually have one of those like fleeting memories of seeing No Doubt's Just a Girl video for the first time and being like, this is awesome. Like I loved it. And I especially loved just the music, the musicianship of Tragic Kingdom is one of the, and I've said this before, is like one of the great records of all time. And it's crazy how a band can make a record like that, and no offense to them, never replicate it again, not anywhere close to it. And it's kind of a bummer because I'm a huge fan of that record, and I was so excited when Return from Saturn came out 4 years later, and it was just there's some good songs on it, but it just wasn't the same. And so I really, really fell in love with No Doubt. People would think it was because I had a crush on Gwen Stefani. It really wasn't. I actually, if you wanted, I had more of a crush on Adrian Young, their drummer, than probably anything. He was, if there's one drummer that I play most like, and I'm not nearly as good as him, but that I wanted to replicate and play like, it's Adrian Young from No Doubt. He was an incredibly inspirational. In fact, like he was the one that really wanted me to play drums when I discovered them when I was, 11 years old, and had just kind of been cursorily messing around with music and playing saxophone and doing other things, playing little drums. And I was like, no, I want to play drums. This guy fucking rules. And I even loved he used to play with no shirt on. And so what did I used to do? I'd play with no shirt on. And when I played drums right up through college, I was just like my live show thing. I would take my shirt off. I'd get a lot of chafing anyway. And I think that's why he did it too. But people are always like, why did you play with no shirt on when you play drums? And I'm like, because Adrian Young played with no shirt on, you fucking asshole. And the other thing is that he would do things like put devil like have like his hair and
I remember that.
And I tried to do that with my hair. He was, and this all came from music videos and from like the inline of the insert of the records and stuff like that. I loved No Doubt, and Tragic Kingdom is just so special to me. I remember buying it, and I just wore that tape out. I just wore that down, no problem at all. And another tape I wore at that time, a little bit before, but during that time as well, off of MTV, was Green Day. When Dookie came out, that record Dookie in 1994. I mean, it's impossible to describe to people how huge that record was. And I must have been at the very, very, very lowest age range of listening to that record. Because I imagine if you were in high school, or because I was in 5th grade, I think, when it came out, if you were in high school or college, I mean, Derek tells stories about he was in London, I think, during college for like a semester, and he saw Green Day during the Dookie tour in London at Brixton, which is like a fucking world famous.
I didn't know he was in. I didn't know that he did that.
Yeah, and he's in like a world famous venue, Brixton Academy, and
wow,
I was like, dude, that must have been wild, because I didn't get to see Green Day live for the first time until 2004, and it was cool, but it kind of sucked. It was an arena tour. They were playing. It was an American Idiot tour. I think American Idiot's fine. It's just different than their other stuff beforehand, and they played the entire record, and they played like one thing from Dookie and one thing from, and I was like, this kind of sucks, man. I would have been so jealous. And one of the things that I remember from this MTV era as well is associated, especially with Green Day, but with others as well, is MTV used to show live footage of bands playing all of the time, and that was really, really cool. They would be like live at Lollapalooza, live at Warped Tour. I remember seeing and the venues would be cool. I don't know if you remember this. This was probably more into the 90s, but there would be like ornate pool, people partying and everything, and then a band would be playing, like a real band.
Oh, sure.
Like the Chili Peppers would be playing, and there would just be, everyone would be going crazy. Like this, and they were really playing. It was live music. It was so dope. It almost makes you wonder how they fumbled so badly. Like, how did you have such a cultural zeitgeist moment for what I would argue is not only Gen X, but millennials, and then you just
absolutely
fumble it? And then it's to the point where it has no relevance at all. It's just so crazy, because it wasn't a little bit of relevance. It was a lot of relevance. And so I remember just turning on MTV at almost any time in the mid 90s, especially over the summer, weekdays, whatever, getting away from the blocks at night that would show things like The Real World or whatever. You could turn it on and be like, oh, fucking Natalie Merchant concert. Oh, Red Hot Chili Peppers unplugged. Oh, it was dope. And it's not over remembering it. It really was like that. You had to sit through all the commercials. You, like you said, you didn't know what you were going to get. You could turn it on and get 5 videos in a row that fucking wanted to put you to sleep. It's not to say that pop didn't play. First of all, I like pop music, but also it's not to say that didn't play a huge role. It did. It played a huge role from the very, very beginning. Madonna came up and all of these others at the same time, that the guys were talking about, and the hair metal bands and the glam rock bands and the rap rock bands and all the things came up later. So it always played a role. So you didn't really know what you were going to get, but it's so interesting to think about how engaged with it I was and how natural it was. And to the point, and this hasn't come up yet, but stuff with like Liquid Television, and then later, just a little bit later, Beavis and Butthead and Daria. There was just a fucking Celebrity Deathmatch, which was awesome. Celebrity Deathmatch was Celebrity Deathmatch was so good.
So good.
And it's so interesting to think about all of the different ways it got me. Fucking Tom Green show. I mean, you can go on and on and on and on. So it had me hook, line, and sinker as a kid. And it's weird that it just doesn't exist like that anymore. It's just totally gone. It's probably more gone. It was both more relevant and it is now more gone than.
It's interesting.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
It really is, because I'm thinking about it just selfishly from an animation perspective, and it's so important, but it's so much bigger than that if you just zoom out. MTV really invested in the 90s especially, but since its inception, they really invested in creativity and really kind of promoting the underdog in some ways, taking a chance. And just, it sounds almost cliche, but a very art-centric perspective in showing animation and design and presenting music and doing unplugged, and really kind of a vehicle for art, all sorts of art. It's interesting. And I love bringing up someone like Madonna, because it was unavoidable. My generation, unavoidable. You saw her everywhere, heard her everywhere, right? And made by her brilliant music, but made by MTV, right? Absolutely. By music video. Well, she wouldn't have ascended to that height without the music video.
Right. Just like MJ with Thriller and all the rest,
Same thing. Yeah. Michael Jackson, another one. I love bringing up No Doubt, because that takes me back to a very specific era and how important Gwen Stefani was. I mean, not only cute and appealing, but sort of, I don't know, man, like reintroducing, I think, the fun and dynamic front woman, right? We had Madonna. We had, in history, dating back in music, we had people like Stevie Nicks. We had Lita Ford. We had Heart, right? We had the Wilson sisters. We had talented musicians and talented women that were in the limelight. They were in the front. They fronted bands. But that specific era of No Doubt and Gwen Stefani, I feel like we were just coming out of sort of a kinder and gentler front woman. Like, think of Bjork in the Sugar Cubes, Harriet Wheeler with the Sundays. You mentioned Natalie Merchant, 10,000 Maniacs. Like, it was a different sort of energy, and here comes Gwen Stefani with that really strong, still feminine, I would argue, but a really strong girl power vibe, right? And really kind of ushered that in for, I think, Gen X and the millennial generation, like really kind of reintroduced that vigor and having like the front woman who was just a strong voice. You know what I mean? Like, I think about her and I just think about like the power of that music. Yes, it was poppy. Yes, it was coming out of ska a little bit.
No, totally.
Right? It had definitely had those vibes integrated, but just a genuine sort of accessible, appealing style of music. And the visual component of that was a big piece, and I think important. I think really important, and it really, like, I know Gwen Stefani's still like, what does she do? She does that show with Howard Stern.
Oh, The Voice or whatever it was. No,
yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, that's the Howard Stern show is something different. That's America's Got Talent, I think.
Oh, yeah, he's on with what's his name? Howie
Mandel. Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's funny. This came up recently actually, because Micah and I were talking. She's not real. I listen to No Doubt a lot, and she doesn't really like them too much. And I'm like, it's so interesting, which is fine. I don't care. But I'm like, it's so interesting because she comes up, we see her on a commercial when we're watching football and it's like, damn, dude, no offense, but what happened here? I think it's cool that first of all, I don't mind that she got all the work done or whatever. I don't care about any of that. What I'm saying is you were a rock star, and it's cool that she married Gavin Rossdale, which was really interesting. They're not together anymore, but that, for people that don't know, he was the lead singer of Bush, which is another 90s.
Everybody's crush in my generation.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Dana loved him. And I was just like, it's so interesting. She reinvented herself several times, but it's like, no doubt tours once in a while. I don't think they have in some time, but it's like, could she still play Spiderwebs, and would she still be interested in playing those kinds of songs as Sunday Morning and, Just a Girl and all of that? Or are you kind of beyond and past that? Because I kind of wish you remembered that that's actually where you come from,
that is an interesting, because a lot of people I'm just thinking of Bjork. They're a lot different, but Bjork sort of just shrunk from the limelight, right? And a lot of people do. They're that big. They're these iconic, legendary personas, globally recognizable. They just kind of phase out, right? You don't see them, but she kind of reinvented herself in a different way. So you have to credit her in that way for putting herself out there, staying out there. But it is tough because those changes, especially the aging, I think that's got to be kind of hard for a woman when you think of her energy and her youth and how she moved and how she danced and just kind of like the physical and, her talent.
Yeah.
Just her out and out talent.
Yeah. And the very personal nature of the songs and stuff too. And
sure.
I mean, because
they wrote a lot of that stuff.
Right. Tragic Kingdom is really about her and the bassist. I mean, basically the whole record. And I think it's cool that they broke up, but the band stayed together and then they played and they all know and they're in on it and they're all making money and whatever. But it's a very emotional and interesting dynamic. I was very tuned into that when I was a kid. I really, really enjoyed them. And they always, and of course, Green Day through Dookie into Insomniac into Nimrod. So those 3 records, which is prime Green Day. I mean, especially I'm a huge fan of Nimrod, which is that's their 97 record. So Dookie, I think, was 94, Insomniac 95, which was really good too. And then 97 was Nimrod. And it's just such a special record. And it actually was more and more dissociated from the music video scene at that point for me. Although they did have a music video for Nice Guys Finish Last. I don't know if you remember that Green Day song, but that was that was the first track off of that. And that was a really funny one too, where they're like playing at a high school, which is cool. So, but I think about just Green Day and how much that band dominated my life. Just that sequence of records was an all-time sequence of records in my mind. They ended up releasing a record in 2000 called Warning, which was not good. And that was when in my opinion, and that's when I kind of fell off of them. And then I came back for their American Idiot and 21st Century Breakdown run, because that was a different Green Day and they kind of embraced, and it was an arena rock kind of thing they had going on, an operatic kind of thing. But I got to give a shout out to them and other bands I wanted to give a shout out to. And a lot of this, I would be interested to know if Dana remembered this, because again, as I said earlier, Dana was definitely I used to watch everything with Dana. Dana always had a motherly relationship with me even before our mom left. But after our mom left, our dad, that really increased to where I was like very attached to Dana. So I was always with her. That's literally how I came to know everything about 90210 and Party of Five and all these things. Like, it's no joke. Like I watched that shit front to back, basically. After her, even I watched 90210 all the way through when I lived in California, on Amazon Prime. But I think about her in terms of music videos, and there's very specific videos that remind me of her, and I wonder if she remembers them. So I wrote some of them down. I brought up earlier a lot of Red Hot Chili Pepper stuff from Blood Sugar Sex Magic. That whole record, but Give It Away is the one I remember. And I don't know if you remember that one where their faces are painted gold. They're just in the field. Dude, yeah. First of all, that just randomly came up when I was working out earlier today. And what a rap rock banger. One of the great rap rock songs of all time. And when you consider written in 90, recorded in 91, I mean, that's pretty seminal. I think about Soundgarden's Black Hole Sun. That was the melting Barbie doll in that video.
Yes.
We used to think that was so, like, I remember she being like really pointing that out to me. We used to love that. So I think about her with that. Smashing Pumpkins.
Oh man.
Right up through the Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness era. So the mid 90s, definitely think of her with a lot of that stuff. A band that's very near and dear to my heart. One of my favorites, Stone Temple Pilots. Both their record Core in 92 and their record Purple in 94. Those really remind me of her, as well as their third record, Tiny Pictures, there's a few songs on there that she really liked too. So I always remembered her about those things too. And then it's funny how that kind of evolved for me into bands like Korn was really big for me on MTV. Limp Bizkit was huge for me on MTV, and I think really helped make them, which was interesting and neat. And then how the bands I loved and the bands that they kind of veered off from each other. What's interesting is a band I haven't brought up yet is 311. And actually my two favorite bands, 311 and Dredge, have nothing to do with MTV, and they both have MTV music videos. And I specifically remember seeing Come Original on TRL a few times and being so excited that it made it. But that was kind of like a bubble thing. I was into them, Ben Folds 5, Bare Naked Ladies, other things from just learning about them off of MTV, and kind of consistently enjoyed them as well. And then there was this other entire track, like the other 50% of the music that I would listen to really came only from MTV or later MTV2, and certainly K-Rock 92.3 in New York, which was an iconic alternative rock, new metal, rap rock station. I mean, that station was so good. I don't know if it's good anymore, but K-Rock was so good. So on the other hand, you had the bands, like I said, like No Doubt and Green Day and all the stuff that led into new metal that I really, Linkin Park and all that stuff that I really, really absorbed from MTV. But it's interesting that I had kind of both of those tracks. So while 311 had music videos and they had big records, like the Blue Album is a triple platinum record, for instance, and Down and All Mixed Up and all that stuff was relevant, that's not why I cared about them. And so it's just kind of the hit or miss. I always just wonder about the things I saw and just happen to see and still listen to today. Like a band like the Apex Theory, who I really love. They only have one record. It came out in 2002. And I learned about them from MTV2, and I just love them so much. And it's just because I happen to have seen them. I always wonder about the opportunities that I lost and the times that I didn't watch MTV or MTV2, which was most of the time, and all the things that I missed, and how my musical personality is kind of still instructed by those things to this day, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about like an iconic era with those bands, and the way bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit sort of did take the baton from, the Green Days and the Smashing Pumpkins and all that kind of thing, where it was just, I mean, that's such an iconic era, and really bands that were so big and really were able to take advantage of the music video format because it was still very relevant. I mean, Dana would have been, like a lot of topics we do, she would have been really good for a topic like this, because she'd have a lot to bring to the party. But man, it's so, it's so interesting. I'm going to go backwards here. This is going to be an odd choice, but this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do a topic mainly centering around music videos. And that's, I ran across this music video probably very early in my YouTube days, which was like 2008, 2007, 2008. I want to say maybe even a little earlier than that. But it's by a band that I oddly still don't know that much about. You may know them, Belle and Sebastian.
Yeah, I know the name, but I don't know anything about them.
I still don't know that much. I'm not even that familiar with their entire discography, but I remember hearing when they came out in, I think, the mid 90s, like let's say they came out in 95, 96. I do remember hearing at that time, like from more than one person, you should check this band out. They're very reminiscent of the Smiths, for instance. And I remember also being attracted to their name because we knew Belle and Sebastian from the anime show that Nickelodeon somehow leveraged and aired in the late 80s as, this iconic anime show that people of our generation would remember, that was also, I think, named from the French sort of children's storybook, right? And I knew they were a Scottish band. I knew they were a relatively large band of 7 or 8 people. And that's really all I knew. But I remember early in my YouTube days, somehow this music video showing up in my feed, the video for their Step Into My Office, Baby. And I think it's 2003, so an odd era, but I love this video so much. I think it captures everything that a music video should be. And I think it just came 15 years too late. Like this video would have been so recognized and appreciated in the late 80s, early 90s. It's just basically this little late 1960s set piece, very period. It feels like a very Office sitcom vibe. It's even filmed with that particular grain and that particular color palette. And the art direction and the wardrobe and the hairstyling and the set design is very, very European 1960s. It's really strong presentation. And the video basically revolves around this guy who's involved with all these inter-office romances. But, he's kind of like the office piece of fluff, but it's very, very comedic. It's really, really funny. It's very, very well done. And it just reminded me of, wow, this is a music video. This is what you could do with a music video. You could tell a little story. You could have really strong art direction and really strong, sort of running by a director. You could have the band in it, even though I don't think they're playing music. The whole band has a part, and it's a pretty big band. And the cool thing about Belle and Sebastian is, and learning more about them, is they're still around. I think they did an NPR Tiny Desk concert last year. They got new albums coming out.
Yeah,
they've only been around for the mid-90s.
I'm looking at their...
the 90s. It hasn't been, too long.
Yeah, it's basically I'm looking at their Wikipedia, mostly original lineup, which is cool too.
Pretty cool.
And about a dozen records or so. So
yeah, they've been around.
They're from Scotland.
And I think they didn't come over. They stayed in Glasgow, but this, if our listeners listen to one video that I'm recommending today, go check this out on YouTube. Step Into My Office, Baby. It's such a good video. And I almost lament the fact that it came like 15 years too late, because this would have won so many awards on MTV. It's so strong. And the ironic thing is, I think it's still on their website. I could not find who directed this video. And this person deserves accolades, because it's one of the best music videos I've ever seen. I wish that it came along when music videos were still a thing. But again, people are still releasing music videos, and they're still a nice promotional tool for a band. But this is, besides just coming off of working on an animated video myself, this was the one that came up again recently in my YouTube feed. And I was like, I love this video. It's just really, really strong. You can see they had a great time with it. And it's everything I love about a music video. Just a little, it's like, I always think of a music video, it can be like this, like a short story is to a novel, just like this little gem. It's not a film. Mm-hmm. It's not a feature film. It's not even a TV show. But I love the fact of just you could do something like this and just have fun with it and sort of send up sitcoms and put the band in funny situations. And sometimes it's kind of cool when you see the band like, oh, this guy's got some acting chops. You know what I mean? He's got more than one talent. That's kind of neat. So that was really ironically 2003, but it kind of set the wheels in motion for me to kind of think back like, oh, music videos. We never really talked about that as a thing. And then, of course, everything that conjures up, MTV and that whole era where, it was such a big part of growing up, such a big part of our lives. And the other ones that I'll mention, we're going backwards again, interestingly enough. But this one was this video, you guys got to check it out. It's so charming. And I think a lot of people missed it because of when it came out, 20 years ago now, but still music videos were all but done by that point.
Yeah, I don't even know where to begin with like earnest recommendations. There's just so many. I did write a few down that I guess I was trying to be like, what instantly comes to mind? And a couple other things came to mind. OK Go has a famous video for Here It Goes Again, which is not what I'm going to bring up. OK Go's earlier video for Get Over It, which I absolutely fucking love that song. I love that video. That's quintessential showing the band playing video. And I think it's very, very well edited and very, very cool. Just a lot of like quick shots and interstitials and stuff. Slipknot's video, Before I Forget, is probably the greatest Slipknot video and a really great metal video because they all wear masks. And you're not supposed to know what they look like or whatever. In this video, they all have their masks off and they're all hanging around this room and they're all like in a circle playing, and all the camera angles are so you can't see their faces, but you know that their masks are all off. One. So it'll be like right behind the drummer and you can see like behind him and like his ear and his beard or whatever, but it's like his foot otherwise, but you see his helmet hanging. And I love that video. The video is so cool. So you can't see anyone's like full face. And I thought that was really, really well done. That's a video that came to mind. Tears for Fears, Head Over Heels is a really great video from the 80s in the library. And that's a cool, that really stitches a lot of like ethereal music video interpretation shit with live playing, which I think is great.
I know these are fighting words, but that's my favorite song of theirs.
Yeah, I mean, where do you even begin? I don't
know they're an amazing band.
I don't even know what I would answer if you asked what my favorite Tears song was. I have no idea.
Did I tell you when Dustin and I did Too Many Games this past summer, we had fans that came out from, I want to say they were from Connecticut, and they were really cool boyfriend and girlfriend couple. And they met us. We talked for a while, and then they're like, we're not staying for the panel tomorrow. We got to go back up to Connecticut. We have a show tomorrow night at Foxwoods. They were going to see Tears for Fears.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And I was like, dude, that's so sick. I didn't even know they were still playing. So the fact that they're still around.
I think Allie saw them maybe earlier this year or last year or something.
Dude, they're still cutting it up.
Yeah, they're doing something, because when I wanted to see them, and I would look every once in a while in California, and they would play very weird places. Like they would play at a winery or some shit. And I'm like, I'm not going to fucking Napa to see this or whatever. But
they should be filling stadiums.
Yeah, they're Tears for Fears
they're that good.
That's a one of a kind sort of band. If people should go listen to the record The Hurting and Songs from the Big Chair. Oh my God. Those two records are so.
I should know this. Are they Australian? Are they English? What's the deal?
They're English.
They're okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I kind of knew. I kind of knew.
Yeah.
I was American, English, or Australian.
Of course. Yeah, the Police would be like Australian, and
yeah,
kind of get that mixed up, I guess, a little bit. And then I wanted to ask Dig about, I don't know if you have anything else you want to talk about with music videos, which is fine, but I wanted to ask about some of the other stuff. I mean, we're talking about music videos, and that's important, but what about Beavis and Butthead? What about the VMAs? What about Daria and Tom Green and Jackass? Do you have anything you want to say about these things, or is that for like another episode?
I mean,
Liquid Television?
Yeah, I mean, Liquid Television was, for those that don't know, was an animated anthology show on MTV in the early 90s. I remember it still being on when I was in high school. Maybe my junior year was when it was in its wheelhouse. And it was such a big vehicle, such a big outlet. One of the only outlets really for alternative animation outside of the film festival circuit at that time. Because you got to remember, this is prior to social media and prior to YouTube. And it was such a crazy but influential example of like animation could be more than kids' cartoons. It could be more than superheroes, and it could be more than feature films. Like there's this other thing, like these short form, weird little animations. And it really put on a lot of important artists and turned me on to artists that I would have probably never heard of if it wasn't for Liquid Television. I think of guys like Richard Sala and guys like Joe Horn, guys like Mike Judge, right? These guys who were these independent animators with these really offbeat voices and visions and styles that they could then culminate everything into one show. Peter Chung with Aeon Flux. I mean, Peter Chung was around for a long time doing storyboards and working for Deke and Sunbow and doing Transformers and, Inspector Gadget and stuff like that before he had, an opportunity to do his own thing. And then he became like an important beacon for animators with the inception of Aeon Flux and went on to be very successful and finally recognized. So Liquid Television was probably the one thing more than any other thing that sort of had me doubling down on, I want to be an animator, just because it just opened up a world of possibilities in terms of style, artistic style, visual style, which really spoke to me. And that animation could be more than these other things. It could feel like it kind of took indie comic books and did an animation show based on that. You know what I mean? It wasn't Marvel, it wasn't DC, it was these other things, and this was really kind of in the infancy of, now we have Fantagraphics and different things, but indie comic books was still a niche thing at that time. So to have an animated version of that was just like everything to me. Like I never missed an episode of Liquid Television. I still have some of them on tape, and just how much.
That's cool. You should dump those. You should dump those. In case,
I do. I have them.
yeah,
And
you should
what's
dump them. I'm saying into digital format so that other people can have them.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. And you know what's interesting? NFL Films is right across the bridge, like in Cherry Hill. Like it's not far from here. It's like one of the big places you could do that. And my skate videos too. I have a lot of things on VHS, but I could dump them to disc, or I could even get digital formats of things, which is interesting. But
because you
just
probably
how
have
much
cool commercials and shit like that, and like a lot of random things that would be
because I wasn't dubbing those out.
You want to know something Micah and I have been doing once a night for the last probably week is we just watch a random episode on YouTube of The Price is Right and we watched one from 1972, 1979, 1983.
And they have all the commercials in there.
Yeah, and all the
everything?
commercials are in there, so we just watched the whole hour. It's dope. And then I think the newest one we watched was from 2003 or something like that.
I love the fact that people take the time to catalog those and make playlists.
Yeah, bless
that's
them,
so
dude.
Cool.
There's a whole, I mean, you know this better than me because you're such a YouTube guy, is that there's just a whole group of people that like are obsessive over that, like old shit, old circulars, going to old malls that are dead and going to Kmart the day before it closes and doing all that. It's so dope. It's just so dope.
Because you want to feel what that time, you want to, what it sounded like, what it looked like, what it tasted like, what it felt like you really want it, because it's so different now.
Yeah, totally.
And only old men with our perspective, but just in general with all the animation, MTV had so much, they really backed animation, whether it was Liquid Television or Mike Judge starting with The Head and then doing Beavis and Butthead and then later Daria, MTV's The Max, taking that Sam Keith Image comic and really like taking it so faithfully from page to screen. Like one of the great comic book adaptations is The Max. And a lot of people don't even know about it, which is so sad. But they really backed animation at a time where really only Spike and Mike's Twisted Animation Festival was backing animation. Like animation wasn't a thing like it is today, like where you go to Netflix and there's hundreds of things.
Why is that? Why do you think that they were like, they had the foresight to say like, we're going to do Beavis and Butthead?
I don't know if it was, I think it comes out of the tradition of, I think being in New York, and a combination of, the arts, graphic design, Madison Avenue, and animation always being a part of that, coming out of the tradition of like, just think of earlier in the 80s, the animated IDs. I Want My MTV, all the different logos, whether they were stop motion or traditionally animated, different artists that did it, coming out of that. But I don't know. And, you think about just being in New York, all the art schools, right? SVA and FIT and Parsons and Pratt and Cooper Union and just the tradition of arts. And at that time, still when MTV started out, Keith Haring was a big thing. So it was like, just coming out of the tradition of, I wonder if it would have been that way if it was anywhere else. But being in New York and New York still being a big part of animation, back then, whether it was TV animation or second only at that time to the West, to Hollywood. Now there, New York is, a second rate city for animation, unfortunately. But back then it was a big thing. And just the fact that, I don't know if it was the fact that it was Viacom.
Yeah. Were they with Nickelodeon yet at that point?
Yeah, well,
because maybe they learned something.
Still owned all of those,
right?
entities.
So maybe they learned something from that. Because isn't it interesting? See, what I was thinking, Dave, as you were going on was,
yeah,
Nickelodeon was kind of doing this thing at the time. I would say from the late '80s into the late '90s, where it's like, okay, and this kind of changed a little bit with like maybe Doug or something, and Rocco, and Cat Dog and all that shit later. But it was like we're gonna have Nick Jr. and cartoons and some stuff like that. And then we're going to make live action stuff for our older kids and our teens and maybe the 20 something hangers on. So I think about Hey Dude, Welcome Freshman, Pete and Pete, Alex Mack, Space Cases, Are You Afraid of the Dark, Roundhouse, all of those things were, and so they were like, we're going to go live action to get them. And MTV is going, we're going to have cartoons to get them. And I just thought that that's interesting. You almost would think that there would be more harmony, so that in a more sane world, you would have seen Alex Mack on MTV and Beavis and Butthead on Nickelodeon in an adult block, therefore solidifying them as some sort of early Cartoon Network or something. It's just so strange that they had all of it going and they just kind of split them apart and then transposed them like that to the point where the animation for teens was on another channel, and the live action shit for teens was on the channel for kids. You know, very strange. And I was all wrapped into that shit at the time. So I was hook, line, and sinker for all of it, frankly. You know,
yeah.
But when you think about
what did they care? They had all of it,
right? That's true. And when it's just so funny when you think about like Salute Your Shorts or Clarissa Explains It All or something. You could think about it just tuning it up to a little higher age, a little higher sophistication, and that would have been perfect on MTV.
Yeah,
you know?
It's really true. Yeah, Nickelodeon always stayed still to this day. I would argue they have a little more actiony stuff that's proprietary now, like Ninja Turtles and stuff. But other than that, they do stay below a certain age line. But what's really crazy for me to think about from a perspective of that era is being sophisticated enough to recognize that animation could be appealing to older kids and adults, because that was not a train of thought in the West at that time.
They were the ones that got it, I guess, first. I mean, at least, yeah.
Very fashion forward.
Yeah, definitely.
Very fashion forward.
So I love that. That's so interesting that they percolated. They had percolating all of these different ideas that probably would have been more harmonious with each other, but maybe people were more open to them because of where they were. So I won't deny that as well, because MTV got very adult with some of the things that it did. I don't think Beavis and Butthead was one of those things. Looking back at Beavis and Butthead, it's so mild and stupid, and it was so controversial. There were only two cartoons I remember really being controversial ever for me, and The Simpsons to a degree. Mom and Dad had a problem with that, but I didn't watch it anyway. It didn't matter. But the first was that, and the second, the first would be Beavis and Butthead for sure, and the second obviously be South Park. I would say Family Guy probably would have got them too if I was a little younger, but I wasn't. I was well in high school by that point. But Beavis and Butthead, when you look back at it, such a cultural phenomenon, so interesting, so funny. I remember very clearly not being allowed to watch it per se, and just watching it at the Kocher's house. And, you know, they didn't give a fuck, and we would just stay up and watch it. And it was so fun and so interesting, but it was just more like you were getting over on someone than it itself was really crazy. The whole, again, destroying music videos, that stuff's so funny. It's almost like early React content or YouTube content in some way.
Absolutely.
And that's the same thing with like the Mystery Theater guys. It's very similar. Exactly. It's very similar to that. And then Daria, I think, and we talked about Daria recently. Daria was so special to me because I felt so connected to it, as if I lived that life or something. I don't know. I didn't have my own Quinn or anything like that, but I loved Daria so much, and I lived for that cartoon. I loved it. And then I brought it up earlier, but just to go over it quickly, is Tom Green. Although that Tom Green show didn't last very long, that show was so fucking funny and so ahead of its time. Do you remember that he had his two friends as his co-hosts, but one of them was just on a TV, like from somewhere else? He was just like, and it was just in the background, and he was just on a television, and he would just laugh. That's all he would do, is just laugh. He wouldn't say anything else. I
totally remember
that. And that he used to, it was kind of early. I don't know if Bam or the guys have talked about this, Johnny Knoxville and stuff. It must have been somewhat of an inspiration for like the early Jackass and Camp Kill Yourself stuff, right? In the sense that, like, he was stealing his dad's car and getting like a lesbian porn scene painted on it. But that was like way before Jackass. You know?
Absolutely it was.
So I wonder if they were inspired by that at all. Tom Green is that show was so fucking funny to me. And dude, I was so bummed when it went away. It didn't last very long at all, but I just thought it was so good. I loved it.
He wasn't the first absurdist comic, but he was the first one for our generations, you know, where it was like so funny, but you knew that a lot of people, especially even if they were slightly older, wouldn't get it. And definitely came with a certain, I don't know, like a certain credential, because he came out of skateboarding. So that, you know, he was a skateboarder. So that, and I think at first he kind of kept that private or as a side bit, but as he became more established, he kind of revealed that part of himself. So maybe directly linked to Spike Jonze and the people that start, and the Steve-O and Knoxville and Bam and all those guys that just later kind of took the baton and ran with Jackass. But yeah,
because I mean, do you remember Camp Kill Yourself? Like, that was so,
yeah, of course.
So I remember Cody had the DVDs in like the late 90s, early 2000s. I was like, this is so fucking funny. Like, it was, of course, MTV found them and brought them over basically to do it, so give them money and means. Like when they went to Japan on Jackass, I was like dying, just dying. It was so, yeah, that it just hit. I don't know if it still works. I haven't seen any of the new Jackass stuff really, probably since the first movie, but
they're still doing stuff.
yeah, they are. It's just, and they're so, what makes it funny is it's like the same guys, I think, and they're all fucking
Same
old,
dudes.
you know? So it's like Pontius and all these, isn't Ryan Dunn dead?
Yes.
Yeah. So he's gone.
Yeah.
Steve-O doesn't do it anymore, right? He's like out.
No,
isn't
Steve-O's
he reformed or something? Oh, but he's sober.
Knoxville's the one that's like superstar status.
Oh, okay.
Steve-O's very successful with his podcast.
Right. And he got sober, right?
Still involved.
And he cleaned up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah. And Bam is the only one that's on the skids because Bam is just, I don't know if you follow his.
I heard he's like not in good shape or whatever, but
he was just seen a week ago, like at our Costco. Like he's from Westchester. He's not even from here. You know, but he's been hanging around Bucks County or whatever.
Dude,
I'm really worried about him.
Yeah, because you knew him back in the day, right?
A little bit. A little bit. I'm not even
Did
sure.
You know any of the other CKY guys?
No. Bam was the only one. Because he was the only one that skated downtown. You know what I mean? He would come in. I mean, way before
FDR
Jackass.
or whatever? Is it?
Yeah, even before the FDR days. He would come in town when I first moved to Philly in 94. He would come down with a couple of friends and Phil and his dad, and they would just film. You know, and sometimes Phil would be the filmer, but they were affiliated with Fairman's, which is a suburban skate shop. It was kind of Westchester's Sub-Zero at that time. But yeah, so Bam was the only one that legitimately skated, at least downtown. And then, of course, when FDR blew up down in South Philly, he became a big part of that. But he was, the thing about Bam that sucks is that he was just, besides being a personality and being able to have it all like these guys still do, you know, and them sort of trying to make inroads to him being a part of it, he was just a talented skateboarder. You know, I feel like he was one of us, you know, and yeah, it's a shame that he went down that route. But I love talking about Tom Green because I feel like he's all but forgotten. And that sort of flavor of comedy was so special and relatable at that point because we kind of all knew somebody like that, you know, maybe even not that funny, but he just seemed like such a regular dude, and he got up to things that were so relatable. I don't know, like it just felt like a typical suburban anywhere USA type of vibe, and you know, I guess he burned too bright and kind of faded out.
Yeah, he was a little early. You know what? It reminds me of
early.
For like the nerds out there, it's like SegaNet or something, you know, or On Live, where it's like, yeah, not yet.
We just weren't ready.
Yeah,
for it.
not yet.
Not yet. Yeah.
You know, like when the Sega Channel came out or something, it's like, no, not yet. Or when the Dreamcast would like go to on the internet, it's like, not quite yet, soon. And I think that was kind of a thing. You're victimized by just being too early or being too late. Timing is really everything, you know?
Oh, it's everything, dude.
But I'll remember Tom Green forever.
I kind of miss the days when they had to be, you know, when they had to like cable TV and you had to be sort of cutting edge or forward thinking and you took chances. You know, they took chances on things, but think of things like you bring up Daria. I worked on the last 6 weeks of that show in the layout department right before it got canceled.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I got hired at MTV. I took a layout test for Daria. I didn't think I did that well on the test. I was a little confused. I was a little mystified by what they were asking for, but I did a character layout test, which was basically like a bunch of keyframes with one background of like Quinn and her boyfriend or something. And I remember handing it in. It was back in the day, like the late 90s, might have been late 97. I was still finishing up school. And I did it on animation paper. I boxed it up. I FedExed it. Like this was like before even email was a thing. And I got the job. I got the call. And I went in for 6 weeks. I worked from home partially. And I think I went into the office 2 days a week because I was still in Philly. So I was Amtrakking my way up there. And then, yeah, the show got canceled 6 weeks in. But that was such a special show because it was like there had been animated sitcoms before, dating all the way back to the 50s with the Flintstones.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah.
But there was never an animated sitcom really that caught lightning in a bottle for teenagers. And they did it with Daria. And it wasn't really about the art direction. It wasn't about having this animation. It was about the writing. You know what I mean?
It was so
about the writing
droll,
and just
dude.
the
It was just
characters.
so droll. It was so good.
So good,
Yeah.
dude. And people were ready for it. That's what and it was just time. And somebody knew that. Or somebody at least was willing to take a shot, which was kind of cool. And I felt like that summed up MTV. You know what I mean? They always felt like they had their finger on the pulse. And it always felt, I don't know. I don't, as a kid and as a teenager, I just don't remember it feeling corny, or at least the stuff that you weren't dialed into. If you didn't want to watch MTV raps, if rap music, hip hop wasn't your thing, you just wouldn't watch Dr. Dre and Ed Lover. But there was something for everybody. And it always felt like it was important to tune into from a pop culture perspective, because you were coming away with something, you know? And yeah, man, it was just really special at a time when, you know what I mean? We didn't have a lot like that. I felt like it was for us. I mean, maybe it was one of the first things that was just like, felt like it was for us. You know, it wasn't for our parents. They didn't get it, right? It certainly wasn't for our grandparents. And the people that were born in the early 90s, they weren't obviously watching that. They were tuned into Nick Jr., if anything.
Right.
So, yeah, I love that. And I love the animation component. And just dating back, like, I know you're not supposed to call it Viacom anymore. It sounds too harsh. You're supposed to call it Paramount now. But Viacom was dialed into animation all the way back to the 60s with Bakshi and Terry Toons being in White Plains. You know, there was this like I love the animation component, obviously, because I'm such a mark for animation, but the New York animation thing was such an integral part of that. I remember my friend pitching a reboot of Heckle and Jekyll. I don't know if you remember Heckle and Jekyll.
No, look it up.
There were like two magpies. It was an old Terry Toons cartoon from the 60s.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't remember this at all.
And he was like, you guys own this. You know what I mean? Like, I know you don't remember it, but you still own this. Let's do a reboot of Heckle and Jekyll. And they almost went for it. So they were on board for anything. They were at least, I know the Jackass guys, I hear Steve-O talking about this a lot. Like, they went to, MTV was a last resort. You know, they would go to Showtime. They would go to HBO. They would go to all these outlets, and everybody would be like, what the, you know, basically like it would be like a 2-minute meeting till, you know, the executives were rolling their eyes and they were ushered out of the office, scooted out. MTV was like, yeah, all right, what do you need? How much do you need? You know, then they would say, well, give us $500,000. And they would say, we'll give you 200,000. I was like, all right, deal. You know, that type of thing. And they did it and they were happy. And then they became huge. They became household names. They took, and you understand this because you were around it, Kyle. They took what was already existing in the skateboard world with Big Brother magazine and all the hijinks and skate videos, and they introduced it to the world.
Totally.
It was brilliant.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
That's why the connection to CKY is so, the connection to CKY is seminal. I mean, it's essential. I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I mean, they took what a little bit of us, a small fraction of the population already knew, and just introduced it to every mainstream audiences.
I remember when Jackass came out late in my high school years, it felt like I was watching something. I was like, wow, I'm ahead of the game on this. I know some of these guys already and know this whole thing, and know that guy's a CKY shirt on or whatever. And you kind of just caught it. I dug that as well. Yeah, this Heckle and Jekyll, I'm looking at. They're kind of frightening, actually.
Terry Toons was like a real low budget, made for TV, an entire animation studio. I think they were initially owned by CBS, and something happened with CBS, and maybe they're still integrated. CBS might still be integrated into the Paramount machine somehow, but you know, they were just like schlock, you know, made for TV, made on the East Coast to compete with Disney and Jay Ward and all the other who's, but on a much lower budget.
And working out of White Plains, that's kind of cool. I love how
Deputy Dog.
I love how little subcultures of potential workforces of these niches exist or did exist in places like that. Because I think about that in North Carolina, how there's just because of Epic and Insomniacs there with half their staffing and all the rest, there's like a little bit of a gaming bubble there or whatever, or out in Bend in Oregon, outside the places you would think. I wanted to ask you about a couple other things, and we can talk about whatever else you want that we didn't touch on yet. What about MTV News? I always think about MTV News, the typewriter thing popping up like da 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 da. And then you'd have your little interstitial. It was usually going back into the show, I think, that you were watching at the end of every half an hour. They would have a little thing. And I don't know, I just remember this from Kurt Loder, like we said, Kennedy, who's been on Fox for years, and all of the rest. It's so interesting to think about that. And I remember it's so strange because I was 9 or 10 when Kurt Cobain died. And I remember that it was all over MTV and that you would almost get the most valuable. I was even aware at that time, and certainly later, like when people that I cared about died. Bradley Noel was a good example of that, Lane Staley and others. That was kind of like a valuable place to actually get news and information and feedback from the people that you care about that matter. It was, it was very forward thinking to say, like, we're going to have some sort of serious news style outlet. We're going to actually do documentaries. I think this bleeds into what ends up happening with their reality shows, not so much Road Rules, but more The Real World, which is really a documentary in its own way, like a kind of a pseudo documentary. And certainly, and we got to talk about the influence that has, and we'll get there. But what do you remember about MTV News? Anything specific?
That's a great call up, man. I forgot all about MTV News. It was such a huge thing. It was I remember Kurt Loder specifically and feeling like, who's this suit? You know, who's this stiff upper lip or whatever? But he was so iconic. And I think it really played into being my age, like later in my teens, to make MTV feel a little more serious, a little more robust, and like a little more, I don't know, like substantial.
Yeah, it's a destination where you can get more than one thing from it.
Yeah, it's not just silly, right? And it's also not like, I guess it would have been easy at that time, especially early on, to feel like this is a feed, right? Like it's just looping videos and commercials and station IDs, right? But that brought in like a daily component, like almost felt like live television in a way, and that was integrated in. So it felt more like it wasn't just like tuning into a radio station where it was just like everything was like on a loop, you know, on some conveyor belt. And yeah, it didn't just, it discussed whatever was topical, right? It didn't have to be pursuant to music. It was anything.
Not at all. Indeed, I think that MTV should get a lot of credit for its vote drives. I guess it would be maybe not 84, but 88, 92, 96, 2000. These were all big get out the vote. They would do like these huge free concerts where they would sign people up to vote and all of that. So it was cool. It was to me, I remember that very well, that it felt very, MTV felt very adult to me, even though it wasn't always adult. It felt like it was something kind of sophisticated.
It must have for your generation. Yeah. Rock the Vote. That was Rock
the Vote. That's right? What it was. Rock the Vote. Right.
Yeah.
And they would do these huge bands would play these huge live shows, and people would go and they would just get signed up to vote. And they get some content out of it. It was brilliant. I mean, they did so many brilliant things, and that's what I wanted to kind of end on. Unless you have anything else you want to talk about, which is reality television. The Real World is the first reality TV show, I'm pretty sure, as we understand it, right? I mean, can you think of, you're older than me, can you think of anything else that's like that?
Not for, at least I don't remember anything, but that was certainly the first one that was dialed into and catering to younger people, for sure. You know, because they were basically the first. I remember the first season of Real World like it was yesterday, and the first few seasons were probably the only ones I ever really paid attention to. But they were all either college or post-college kids, right? So they were at an age where high schoolers were certainly down to watch it because they were slightly older young people. So you were already like early career people. Right. So it was appealing. It was almost like watching a live version of Friends or something, you know, at that time. And yeah, man, it was like, but it was ushering, what we didn't realize at that time, the first few seasons, where it was ushering in this sea change. You know,
totally.
It was the beginning of this thing where everything would kind of change forever. But I remember enjoying it, at least early on.
Well, it's so interesting because before we started, I was looking up some dates because I wanted to make sure I had this right. The Real World began running in 1992, so that was your senior year in high school.
Senior year, yeah.
And it ran until 2019. I couldn't tell you anything about the last 15 seasons or so of it, or more than that probably. But it was like this. I remember it being really important to Dana. And Allie later on, and to a lot of my friends. And I remember introducing a lot of interesting notions to people probably in a national and global stage: AIDS and death and job loss and heartache. And I remember what was it, the second or third season the guy had AIDS when they were in San Francisco? I think it was in the 90s.
Yeah, was that the third
season, something like that? And that was like a really big storyline. But what's so interesting about it is that, and again, I'm probably off. I'm looking at the reality TV Wikipedia, and there's a bunch of things about, oh, this was reality in this. But I don't, and older people can tell us about the relevance of those things. But it seemed like, from my perspective, that this happened. And then it took a good 5, 6, 7 years for the networks to understand what was going on. And what was the first network that understood it? CBS. And which is obviously associated with Paramount and Viacom and MTV.
Yeah.
And Survivor was, in my opinion, the first mainstream. And then they did Big Brother, and there were other shows on other networks like The Mole and all of these things that were early on. And then before you knew it, the dam broke. So it's so interesting that they kind of threw that out there. It was very successful, but no one else knew really what to do for a while, like how to replicate it. It's almost like the networks and a lot of these places were just totally married to scripted television. I think what ended up happening, Dig, is when, and I think this is materially true now, but it certainly was true then, is when these people realized how much cheaper it was to do this than it is to do scripted, edited content. They're like, oh, okay. I think it just took time for them to figure out that it's way cheaper for them to just send 20 assholes to an island with Jeff Probst and a fucking camera crew than it is for them to do a 24 episode season of How I Met Your Mother or whatever. And they're like, okay, cool. We'll do that. And then they made an asinine amount of money on it, and the margins became huge. And then that's all it became. I almost, to the point where I almost feel like the sitcom is almost dead. I mean, I think there are a few examples left of it. The procedural seems to even be dying. Now it's about like this, and my only view of this is from football commercials during football. And I watch every network at some various points. Like, it seems like it's a lot of LA Fire and things like that. And This Is
Mom
Us.
still loves this stuff.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That kind of thing. Right. It doesn't seem like a lot of comedy. It doesn't seem, and a lot of news journalism and all of that. I don't know. But so what do you think about that gap? Why did it take so long? Can you think of anything between The Real World and Road Rules and then Survivor? I don't. Again, it just seemed like it was all sitcoms and all dramas.
Yeah, that's a really
and
interesting
some procedurals.
Point. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I was largely tuned out of cable TV at this point. I was so busy in college that I was like right in that specific era of time. But definitely, I think you make a great point about the budget friendliness of the reality show. You know what I mean? Think of skeleton crew, limited tech, right? Limited overhead, and also just a strong appeal to people wanting to see reality, and I guess the voyeur nature in all of us, right? And tapping into that, really, like, oh, people want to see when people live together. It's like having a roommate situation, but you don't have to deal with any of the negative aspects. Right. You just have to watch. Right. And that certainly appealed to me. And I think that's still appealing to many people.
Yeah. There is something about reality TV that's undeniable, that
it's so good.
And I think that it can be really well refined. Dana and I are a huge fan. They don't do them anymore, but the PBS series of Manor House and Colonial House and all those things, where basically they would just for people that aren't familiar with these things, and I wanted to be on Colonial House so bad, they take just random people, sometimes families or single people, whatever, of all different ages, so that there might be like 20 or 25 of them. And they're like, all right, all of you are going to live in colonial America in 1700. Here's your piece of land. These are your roles. And so like someone's the mayor, someone's like a workman or whatever, and you get what you get, and you have to do it for 6 months or whatever it is. And Manor House was so cool because it was in this beautiful Victorian stately manor, and someone was the hall boy and someone was the lord of the manor, and they were just regular people on the outside, and it caused all of this tension between them as they had to kind of like go through these roles as they live out the past but live out the present. Very dynamic and interesting stuff can happen when you remove the script and just do it. So I appreciate that, but I think a lot of it was just shrewd money pinching, and very wisely so. I mean, when you think about the Osbournes or something, or Hulk Hogan and some of these other people, even fucking the dude that played Peter Brady, right? These guys all became mega relevant for things that had nothing to do with that. Yeah, that show was awesome. He was married to Adrienne Curry or Adrienne Curry or whatever her name was.
That's right. I forgot about.
My
I
Fair
forgot
Brady.
all about that show.
My Fair Brady. Yeah. So
that was a wonderful show.
Yeah. So it's just so interesting to think about the Osbournes. Black Sabbath wasn't relevant to me at all. I knew Ozzy Osbourne even as I'm 38 years old now. I knew Ozzy Osbourne. I knew he was a singer. I knew he was a metal guy. I knew that he was connected to things I really loved, like family values and all that kind of stuff, which were really important to me. And people can go look up the Family Value Tour, which was absolutely insane how good those shows were. But he was really the dude from Sharon.
He would have been
Right.
for your generation, and largely for my generation too. If I didn't have Dad introducing me to Sabbath and solo Ozzy, that probably would have been my association too. And Jason Dill was on that show. I think Jason Dill, pro skater, wants everybody to forget that. But and you know what I loved about actually Real World specifically? I remember this really speaking to me, was that each series, each season was set in a different city. So it would be New York, Seattle, Miami. So it had a real interesting set piece nature to me, where it was like every season's going to be in a different setting. And I think largely from a skateboarding perspective, that appealed to me, because I've always been very interested in cities, but I loved that too. Like it wouldn't just be New York. It wouldn't just be LA. They would go other places, sometimes offbeat, sometimes places that you were really curious that you didn't know anything about. And it's true, man. They must have the return on those reality shows of minimal overhead, minimal payout, and maximum profit must have been astounding.
Huge.
It must have been such a model for staying in the black.
Yeah, who even knows? I'm sure there were probably some residual costs, but way less than paying all the residuals that you're going to pay to everyone involved in fucking Full House or something. Whenever it's
a great point.
So, yeah, pretty interesting. Is there anything else that you wanted to say? It's so interesting talking about this, Dig, in the sense that really, I mean, obviously music, MTV, but music is the binding product between all of these things. It's the water cooler in some sense. It's so interesting that it wasn't that until we were able to listen to it on our own. And then to be able to visualize it is a whole other thing. That's why I think live concerts are some of the best things ever, and why I dedicated so much of my time as a younger person to going to concerts, even concerts that I didn't really want to go to, or things that I didn't care about, or things I never heard of. And that's how I saw so many different acts. And so it's cool that there was, at least for a while, a brand that really was able to speak to it. And now music, I think, is in some ways fucked and weird, but in other ways so dynamic and active, because you can really do and put out whatever you want. And as I've said many times to people, because I talk about how the games industry is really suffering from the lack of residual money, but that the residual money in music has never been more, because there have never been more live shows. There have never been more festivals, cruises, all these. There's just a million different bands. Like I said, when I saw Gin Blossoms and Sugar Ray, that they can just come to a place like Central Virginia, play for a couple thousand people and make a little bit of money is like awesome. And so it's in some ways more alive than ever. But I think that the general front facing product is unfortunate right now. And that's why I just listen to so many old things. But what are your closing thoughts? Or is there anything we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, man, that's a great point about just music or any sort of creative endeavor. Like, there's no barrier. There are so few barriers anymore. Now, everything's heavily saturated. If you're trying to get a podcast going, or you're trying to get an album launched, right?
Yeah, good luck.
Or an animated series, even on a big thing like Netflix, like it's so easy for things to get lost in the shuffle or, unrecognized. But yeah, this is a time when I think that's what a lot of these nostalgic topics, but especially this one, like, I think that's the interesting aspect of it, is that it's so interesting looking back with the perspective that we have now, and just how much things have evolved. It's so different today than it was when MTV launched 40 years ago, or, however long ago. It's like, it's a pretty insane, this rapid evolution is really kind of crazy over our lifetimes. And, looking back at this particular era, it just reminds me of the way it used to be, which is interesting. I'll go out on one thing. I wanted to talk about one video and just the power of MTV. And this had an effect on me for the better part of 15 years, where you wouldn't have even necessarily listened to a certain band or musical group, but the video sort of drew you in. And I think about this with Guns N' Roses, And I think of a music video that would probably be on a lot of our top 10 lists in November Rain, right? This is just on my list. I have some interesting offbeat ones, but this is the one that I think is the most iconic. 92. I was still in high school, and 92 is still a time where I think MTV just had a lot of potency. Like, it was still important. It was still very much a part of our lives. It was going to start changing now and ushering in the different animated shows and ushering in the real world. And it was going to start to change, but still very much in its traditional mold. And Guns N' Roses is an interesting one for me, man, because I remember being in 7th grade. This was probably 86-ish. They came out, made a huge splash with Welcome to the Jungle. I remember the music video. I remember it being on MTV every 2 seconds. I remember everybody rocking the Guns N' Roses shirt. Guns N' Roses was the great leveler as far as rock bands, because I feel like it was universally appealing. Like, the metalheads at that point that we went to school with, right? The real heavy metal dudes and dudettes. They were rocking the Metallica, the Iron Maiden patches on their denim jacket, Megadeth, but they weren't, right? But Guns N' Roses was something different. You know, like the preppy girl might wear a Guns N' Roses shirt. Like, their appeal was really strong. And I remember that sort of LA glam hair rock thing. I didn't get it when they first came out. I wasn't really feeling it, right? And then a couple of years passed. It was very popular. It wasn't for me. And then the November Rain video came out, 92.
Yeah, that's Use Your Illusion too, right?
That is the first album.
Oh, the Use Your, okay, yeah.
I think it's Use Your Illusion 1. And I think I always loved the ballads. You know, I remember Poison with Every Rose, and I remember Motley Crue's ballads, and oh, sorry, this is a power ballad, right? And I just remember this video because we already had things like Thriller. Don't get me wrong. We already had the 15-minute long legacy videos narrated by Vincent Price that were like mini films. Like, I get it, right? Like, we already had those epic offerings, but this one was different because it did have the drama and the scale, and it had the long version and the short version. But there was something about the scope of this video. I think it's a very good song too, but you know, just something about the 56-piece orchestra and the epic cathedral and Stephanie Seymour, right? Like the supermodel vibe. And it had a story, but it also had the band playing, but there was something happening. You know, Axel and Stephanie are getting married, right? They're in the church. Slash forgets the ring, right? Then Slash is feeling out for the ring. Then later on, it all comes out, it all works out, and then Slash leaves during the ceremony. Like, what is he doing? He's going to play his guitar solo outside.
Yeah, dude.
Right? And it goes from this epic cathedral, like almost like St. Patrick's Cathedral interior, and he walks out, and it's like a little chapel, you know, in the middle of the desert. Like, the exterior is this tiny little thing.
Awesome.
So good. So stylized. He plays this epic guitar solo. And I just remember how lavish it felt. You know, it felt like high budget. It just felt big. And it was the first video where I was like, I think I was just like, it almost made every kid want to be a rock star. They're hanging out in the bar. They got their cigarettes and their whiskey, and they're lined up with the supermodel Stephanie Seymour and her flock, and they're all hanging out. I'm like, well, I want to do this.
Yeah, totally, dude.
You know what I mean?
So
I want to
cool,
be
man.
a part of this. And I didn't even like Guns N' Roses at that point. So it just goes to show you how, and none of my friends did. But every time that video came on, we were front and center. You know, we were held enraptured. We were just like, all right, like, we have to sit here for 10 minutes and watch this thing.
Dude, I think that,
and it just like, it was such an important part of growing up. You know, I would have never listened to Guns N' Roses on the radio, but every time that song came on, I wanted to watch that short film, you know, and it just reminds me of just the power that those images had. And just like, there's just something about tying music with filmmaking, I think, right? Two things that we all love. We all love movies. We all love music. Let's put those two things together. That's the brilliance of the music video. And that's at the heart of this conversation for me, because That's the thing I think I missed the most. It's just the music video. That's the thing that started it. That was the fuel. And I don't know. It's just different now. I know they still exist. I know we have YouTube, and I love YouTube. I know you do too. But it was just like a different world where it seemed like these things were so important. And I guess it was such an interesting time in that now we have, I don't know, content is just a dime a dozen now. We only had so much of it to ingest back then. So it was all special, right? Even if we didn't like the music.
Totally. Yeah, I was going to say November Rain. I like the song. I'm not crazy about it, but I love the intro. Like the first, before the vocals, the build up and all of that leading into like the flute or whatever is played. It's just so dope. Such a great intro. Yeah, very well said. And I was looking up something about Duran Duran because I feel like they tried to replicate that when they came back with that self-titled record, the Wedding album or whatever that they released.
Was that Ordinary Life?
Yeah, Ordinary World or whatever.
Ordinary World.
I think they did a very similar music video. Like, someone was getting married in the rain? Or
yes,
something like
I think you're right.
So there was like some zeitgeist they were trying to capture with that too, which is funny. But yeah, that's well said. The last thing I wanted to say was, and I forgot this, I was looking at my notes here. Do you remember the show Undressed?
No.
That was a MTV show that was on late at night. That was kind of more for high schoolers and maybe even college kids. That were basically about sexual hookups in. You should look it up. It's almost hard to describe. It would be like a 10-minute or 12-minute story of like a girl in her dorm room and she's like hooking up with this guy or whatever, but something, there's something to learn from it or whatever, but it's pretty well done and very subtle and weird. And it was called Undressed. And I remember that being like that felt very adult too. And I remember it being on late at night. So yeah, definitely check that out. Yeah. I wanted to.
Yeah. It started in 99. I remember the name. I feel like the name is just iconic, but I'm looking at it now. 99 soap opera, 6 seasons.
Yeah. And it had like this very iconic branding on it where the show, I remember, would just start and it would just say Undressed in small letters, I think, on it.
Yeah. Or whatever. I see it. I got that image.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the silhouette.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, check that out.
That's one I missed.
Yeah, that might be interesting for you. And then that was like a high school thing for me. But yeah. And then we already brought up Celebrity Deathmatch, which I just wanted to shout out again. I just thought Judge Mills Lane or whatever, it was so, that show was really, really funny and well done and a great way to kind of take the piss out of people, I thought. So I wanted to give a shout out.
Another interesting way to tie in animation with relevant celebrities that were, newsworthy at the time of the matches. And just a great vehicle that was done by a small animation studio in New York called AMP NYC. They were called, who I worked with for a short time. I worked on a little short they did called Broccoli. He was like just a little piece of broccoli who had just he was just up to hijinks. He was a rude little son of a bitch. But it was like secondary. I don't even know if the pilot ever even went out, but they were working on Celebrity Deathmatch at the time. I wasn't allowed anywhere near that because I was still in school, I think. But that was an important one. That was a really big thing. And to do stop motion's expensive, man. And that was traditional stop motion, which is all but, a dinosaur all but buried, dead and buried.
Yeah, well, it's too bad, man. Stop motion. We were talking about that recently on another episode. I don't know what the context was, but just about how cool that was, how I tried to do that with my friend Eric. You remember Eric? And he had a stop motion camera in the 90s, in the earlier mid 90s or whatever. And we would try to do things with Star Wars figures and
so cool
and cars and try to move things around. And it was just, it was really cool, but so complex. You not accidentally knock something, or I just couldn't imagine doing that with stakes, right? Where you have to it's not just, you're not just dicking around. Like, you better not bump anything, Holy shit. Like, that's gotta be,
I can't even imagine. Yeah. The tension and the patience.
Gotta be crazy.
Even for an animator. That's I think Leica in Portland is the only stop motion studio still around, but they're directly infused with cash by Nike. They're owned by Nike, pretty much. The head, Travis Knight, Phil Knight's son, runs he's an animator who runs the studio. So I think they operate directly off Nike money. So they did films like Coraline and Paranorman and stuff like that. But and they do beautiful work, but I think they're only around still because of, and Henry Selick, who directed Nightmare Before Christmas and stuff like that. He's like the animation director there. He's like the head of creative there. But that's it. I mean, or else, Yeah, it's a shame because I think that would be my dream to do that for a living.
It's a beautiful art
Just
form.
like lock me in a room and let me do stop motion, especially with the technology they have today where you could go back and you could fix errors with the computer and stuff like that. It's still traditionally done, but there's fail safes, so it's interesting.
Right. It reminds me a lot of ILM and Star Wars with the miniatures.
Oh, motion control. Yeah.
And just getting all that right in real time, though, which is so cool. Them driving the truck really fast down, like you see them in the fucking back with the camera, fucking probably holding on for dear life, and they're just driving like 40 miles an hour, and then something explodes. You better hope you got it,
dude. It's so good.
Yeah, it's good shit. Love it.
Oh,
I love that it was hard, and I'm not saying it's not hard today. It's very difficult today, but there's something different about that, about like animating the traditional way or doing stop motion or whatever. It's just there's just something so ballsy and interesting about that I love. All right, Dake, that's it for this episode of Knockback. What'd you think?
I had a great time.
Oh yeah, it was fun. It was fun to reminisce for a little while. I think people will enjoy this one. Do you want to end with a dad joke?
Yes, this one's hot off the presses, man. This comes from our friend James on the old DMs. Kyle, James says he was recently asked who his favorite vampire was, and he said, that Muppet from Sesame Street. And they told him, he doesn't count. James replied, I assure you, he does. Not bad, James.
Not bad.
I feel like James might have made that one up, so I give that one extra credit.
A little verbose, but good.
A little verbose.
Yeah.
There might have been a more elegant way to say it, but still, hey, I didn't have any.
No, I didn't. I'm not sitting here writing jokes.
James isn't getting paid.
The writer's strike is over.
But not by us.
So jokes are being written again, which is good. All right, my friend. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to me. Hope you're well. Hope you and yours are well, and hope everyone else is doing well out there too. Thank you for supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia, merch, laststandmedia.store, including free shipping here in these United States on all stickers. So check that out if you'd like. We'll see you next time for more. Until then, goodbye. Knockback, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. Knockback's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including Knockback, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.